All right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be. Welcome to the latest edition of ACSA and Craft Spirits Magazine, Craft Spirits Roundtable. I'm Jeff Cialetti, editor-in-chief of Craft Spirits Magazine, and I will be your moderator today. A couple things about Craft Spirits Magazine. Craft Spirits Magazine is the American Craft Spirits Association's bi-monthly digital magazine, and it's the unparalleled resource for in-depth insight and intelligence for the entire craft spirits universe. The magazine features the information and analysis that small independent producers and allied businesses need to operate in today's complex craft beverage market. Today, we're going to focus on some of those independent producers who focus on one particular category, and that's rum. But before I introduce the panelists, I just have a few housekeeping items. We enthusiastically invite your questions for our panelists today. If you have a question, please write it in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of your questions either at a natural break in the program or in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. You might notice that you've been muted on entry and your video function has been disabled. We ask that you remain on mute for the duration and communicate only through the chat function. And if you want to revisit today's program or recommend it to others, it will be archived at both AmericanCraftSpirits.com and AmericanCraftSpirits.org and CraftSpiritsMag.com in the coming days. And it'll also be appearing in podcast form on the Craft Spirits podcast. Now let's meet our panel. First up is Megan Campbell, South Louisiana native. Megan is Chief Operating Officer, Master Distiller, and fearless leader of Montanya Distillers in Crested Butte, Colorado. It's there where she oversees daily operations and heads up production of their award-winning rums. Megan honed her craft at Oxbow Rum in Louisiana before joining Montanya in 2021. Joining Megan is Jordan Cotton, co-founder and CEO of Cotton and Reed, Washington, D.C.'s first rum distillery. Jordan is also the current president of ACSA's board of directors, a role he took on this past spring. And finally, please welcome Bob Gunter, president and CEO of Kōloa Rum Company in Lihue, Kauai, Hawaii. Kōloa has captured the spirit of aloha since it opened its doors in 2009. But they can obviously do a better job introducing themselves and their rums than I can. So I'm going to hand it over to them to tell us a little bit more. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order and start with Bob.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Aloha, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be part of the panel and to be visiting with each of you today. Um, I'm happy to be here to represent and speak to Kōloa Rum Company and all that we do here on the island of Kauai. As Jeff mentioned, we've been producing um, what we believe to be world-class rum products since September 2009. So we're no longer a startup and well into the growth and development stage of our brand. And I guess what I'd like to point to is our success to date, to the extent that we have been successful, is due in large part to our access to a very robust visitor industry here. We get millions of visitors from around the world that come to Hawaii. And so we have a tasting room, and company store. And through that, we are able to make contact with literally thousands of visitors coming from all parts of the globe to Hawaii annually. And so that access to those folks, gives us a heads up, I guess, in terms of being able to market, promote, and introduce our brand to others. We produce a wide variety of spirits products, and I'm sure later in the discussion, I'll be able to expound on those a little bit more. But pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Jordan.
Hey everybody, happy to be here talking domestic rum. All of our, favorite topic, and exciting that we've covered so much geographic breadth here with our awesome panel. Um, Cotton and Reed opened up in 2016, so we've been making rum in DC for 9 years now. And sometimes that feels like 5 minutes, sometimes feels like 1,000 years. But we are making our rums kind of in the long tradition of East Coast rums, bringing up molasses and cane syrup, fermenting and distilling that on site in Washington, D.C., um, which might not be a place that as readily as Kauai fits into, the image we have in mind of where rum tends to come from nowadays. But, the whole U.S. East Coast really was rum country way back in the day. So, we're trying to bring back the domestic rum thing from the capital.
All right, great. Thank you, Jordan. And Megan, let's hear from you.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Megan here, representing Montanya Distillers. We started kind of around when Bob did back in 2008. We've always been a high mountain rum brand. Our distillery is based in Crested Butte, Colorado, and we're about 9,000 feet in elevation. So we're a ski town community. We get a lot of tourism from being a ski culture town. So we have a tasting room right on the main street where people from all over can come experience our brand. Kind of one of the things that makes Montana unique is, uh, as far as in America, we're one of the only rum brands that age at 9,000 feet. And so we take a lot of those high elevation barrel aging techniques from Venezuela and Guatemala, where they would bring the barrels up to the mountains to age. And so kind of our focus in the rum scene in the US is kind of premium barrel aged rum and seeing what a barrel at elevation can contribute to a spirit. Yeah, I'm kind of a new owner of Montanya. I started off as the head distiller back in 2020 and took an ownership role in 2023. So learned a lot in the past 2 years and happy to be here and talk some rum because America makes some great rum.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan. So let's kick off our conversation. First, I'd like to talk about your raw materials, whether that's molasses or cane syrup or cane juice. If you're, if only if you're going for that agricole style character, but I know a lot of you use molasses, so I'd like to ask each of you how and where you source your raw materials, what have been the challenges with that, whether from a supply chain or sustainability perspective, as well as how you settled on a supplier. So first, I'd like to direct this question to Megan.
Yeah, we source all of our sugar cane from Louisiana from a sugar co-op called Lula. We use a blend of blackstrap molasses and raw granulated sugar. I've worked with cane juice before back in my Oxbow rum days. I'll do a little shout out to them. But unfortunately, being where we are in the mountains, cane juice isn't stable at our elevation. So we use molasses and sugar for that. Kind of why we chose Louisiana and to source our sugar came from there. We really wanted to be as domestic as we could. I think in the first 2 years of Montana, we did ship molasses from overseas, and just there was some supply chain issues that way, and it just got expensive. So being a B Corp run distillery, we hold like a sustainability certification. So really, when we try to align with our suppliers, we want to kind of reduce our carbon footprint as much as we can. Um, we've been working with the same family in Lula, Bellerose, Louisiana since 2011. And it's been a great relationship. Really no issues as far as procurement on our side. It's just being in the mountains and it coming from Louisiana, we pay a buttload and freight. And that's kind of our biggest issue being where we are. Yeah, and I'm from Louisiana, so it's kind of a full circle to support Louisiana agriculture. Um, Kind of, if anyone doesn't know, Louisiana and Florida make the most sugar, process the most sugar cane in the U.S. And Louisiana just surpassed Florida last year. So there's a lot of sugar to be processed, and we're happy to lend a hand in that.
Oh, great. And Jordan, what are your thoughts?
Yes, so our sourcing has been a little bit of a journey, and we're in a transition right now. So when we first opened 9 years ago, we were buying a couple different grades of molasses from LSR, Louisiana Sugar Refining in Gramercy, Louisiana, and we were getting let's see, some great product from them, but also had some consistency issues from shipment to shipment, which, as we all know, as craft beverage producers, it is hard to make a consistent product under the best of conditions. So we made a switch a few years back. And when I mentioned that we were buying multiple grades of molasses, we've always produced our rums with a couple of different inputs. Our biggest product is our unaged white rum, and any of the character and complexity that we want to build into that has really got to be in there right out of the still. So we try and develop different complementary complex flavors and aromas from our source ingredients. So when we moved away from LSR, we wanted to find a blend of cane syrup, which retains some of the grassiness of fresh cane juice. That cane syrup and molasses look very similar. They're both going to be brown sugarcane based goops, but the cane syrup is just evaporate off some of the water content from the juice, not go through any of the refining process to remove any granulated sucrose or anything like that. Whereas molasses will be what's left behind after you've removed some or as much as you possibly can of that sucrose. So we get some different flavors from both of those, and we buy a blend of those from a sugar refinery in Savannah, Georgia, or at least we did for a number of years until they got acquired for, I want to say, the second or third time since we started working with them, and the new ownership decided to lose their Bon Sucro certification, which is the global sugar supply chain auditing organization that gets pretty deep under the hood, looking into environmental and labor and human rights practices, which if we were buying something not domestic, because that facility is in Georgia, but they import products from around the world to refine and blend and package those. We wanted to have that certification. And so we are in the process now of switching over to a Guatemalan cane syrup molasses blend that comes to us via Canada and has the Bon Sucro certification. So we've been using that for a while, and it's always a little hairy switching our ingredients like that, because we don't, want to change the flavor of our products that we're happy with if we, aren't choosing to do that for the product's sake. So it's a tricky thing.
Great. And now, Bob, it would be understating things to say that you're in a bit of a unique spot geographically. You're surrounded by water, and your nearest mainland is thousands of miles away. How much Hawaii grown sugarcane are you using, and how much are you getting from other places? What are some of the unique challenges with running a Hawaiian rum distillery? Oop, unmute. You're still on mute, Bob.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yes, we're 3,000 miles in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which makes it really challenging, both logistically, geographically, everything. But it's something, that we get used to and contend with. So it's just part of doing business here. But it's interesting that my background in Hawaii actually was in the sugar industry. I worked for one of our larger sugar plantations back in the day, Lihue plantation, which was part of a conglomerate of different farms on the different islands. So I'm familiar with the product, both from a cultivation and processing perspective. But we decided in the very beginning that we would not use molasses nor cane juice for a variety of reasons, primarily because as I think everyone knows who are involved in this business, cane juice in particular is very fragile and very volatile and subject to spontaneous fermentation. And there are all kinds of considerations there when using that. And molasses, is actually an industrial byproduct of the sugar production process. It does have residual sugars, and obviously, it can be fermented and distilled to make, some pretty darn good rums. But we decided to go the other route, that is using pure cane sugar. Sugar crystals are typically, depending on the mill, 99.5% pure sucrose. Sucrose, as we all know, is the element in cane juice that will eventually ferment and, it can be distilled. Also, cane sugar is very stable. It has an indefinite shelf life and not subject to, spontaneous fermentation and so forth. So we also believe through, trial that rum produced from cane sugar tends to be, maybe not in all cases, but typically tends to be smoother, cleaner, a little more polished, and that translates to us to being more sippable and more friendly on the palate. So we decided to go with pure cane sugar. At the time we started production in 2009, we were sourcing our sugar exclusively from the one remaining sugar mill that was operating at the time on our island, Kauai, K and Robinson Company. And then, wouldn't you know it, a year later, they announced that they were closing and going out of business. And so we arranged to purchase, I think it was 60 tons of sugar from their last harvest, and that lasted us at the time for a year and a half or so. And then we began importing cane sugar from a mill that was still operating on the island of Maui. So there was an inter-island barge trip that was required. And so we purchased our sugar from HC&S plantation or mill on Maui until they announced that they were going to be closing. And at the time, it was the one remaining sugar mill operating in the state of Hawaii, down from about 20 when I first moved here back in the 1970s. So we purchased 60 tons of sugar from their last harvest, and we had them store it in Maui, and we stored it here. And that lasted us for a couple of years. And then as that began to draw down, we began bringing it in from C&H Sugar Company in California, who was sourcing their sugar from East Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. So it's domestic sugar that we continue to use today. So we're not an agricole, and we're not a molasses-based rum, but we are a cane sugar-based rum. There are some challenges associated with that, particularly on the fermentation side of things, but we're pleased, with the result. And I think the profiles of our rums, I think, are attributable primarily to that.
And how would you say that it kind of shapes the identity of your rums? I know it's a bit of an abstract question, but
It is.
using that sugar, but what would you
I,
say?
I think, of course, I'm somewhat prejudiced. I think that our rums tend to be very, I mentioned this earlier, very smooth, very clean, very polished, uh, and, very sippable, and tend to mix well with flavors. And as a brand, that's where we have, I think, um, formed our niche, so to speak, with flavors. We have a full portfolio of rums with different flavors. And I think we've been able to achieve the very favorable flavor profiles by virtue of the smoothness and nature of the distillate. So for what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish in terms of making rums that are very friendly and approachable, we think that serves us best. Not to mention that cane sugar is very, shelf stable. As long as it's sealed properly, you can store it indefinitely. So it's very accommodating in that sense.
Similar question for Megan. Just how's the molasses you use? How does that really shape your identity?
For sure. And I'll kind of ditto to Bob's point. So Montanya uses cane sugar and molasses. And our blend is heavy on the cane sugar. So we use about 80% cane sugar and 20% molasses. That's all sourced from Louisiana. We do that for the same reasons, for its stability, us being in the mountains. So we can buy in a big lot of it and it can last us over time. And then we have consistency in our production. From being mainly a cane sugar based rum. Same thing, kind of how Bob was saying. We like to say our rum's smooth, not sweet, especially like for our Platino rum. We don't really specialize in making rums, a white rum that's really robust and has a lot of those funky flavors. It's more in like that cleaner, lighter profile than you would get from, let's say, a cane juice rum that you would have like those grassy, herbaceous notes. Um, yeah, our kind of magic is in the barrel aging, which I'll talk about later.
Excellent. Jordan, same question.
Yes. So what is the identity of our rum is one of the biggest, most interesting questions to try and answer when you're starting up a new American rum distillery because there isn't really a quintessential, either culturally expected or regulatory, required style of rum. We can make all these spirits out of these different sugarcane inputs and call them all rum, which would be not possible in a lot of countries that have stricter different regs. So for us, we wanted to make something that lands kind of like um, a multi-island blend is, going to be the most analogous products in the market, where they're generally taking a source spirit from a couple different rum producing countries that have different characteristics. So we want ours to land with like, ooh, it's got a little rich fruitiness to it. Oh, but there's a touch of grassiness, but it's actually ultimately pretty light and clean, like a, mojitoable, maybe, Dominican or Cuban style rum. So we like all of those different characteristics blended together. So using the cane syrup brings us an element of that, and using the molasses component brings us an element of that. And we ferment that blend of two inputs with two different yeast strains that each accentuate different elements of that as well. So it's very key to everything that we do.
And let's move on from the ingredient procurement side. Now let's talk process. Step by step, Jordan, talk everything from fermentation to distillation to aging to bottling. Just give us the elevator pitch on your process. Talk
Yeah,
about a couple of your flavored offerings as well, whichever one you want to add to that.
definitely. So all of our products are going to start off with that cane syrup molasses blend. We get those pre-blended, and we'll add. Let's see. We'll ferment those in parallel. We use those two yeast strains I mentioned. One is a now commercially available, but isolated from wild sugarcane yeast in Martinique that accentuates a touch of the grassy stuff you might expect in that style of rum. It's nowhere near as intensely funky or grassy vegetal as an actual cane juice based rum, but it's just like little hint. Um, the other yeast strain we use is a uh, going to more typically be used in Chenin Blanc fermentation. And when we ferment at a little higher temperature than it's comfortable with, we're at, call it 90 Fahrenheit. It produces some nice tropical fruit aromas in its distress. We go for 5 and 6 days with those two different yeast strains, which depending who you ask, is kind of a long time. Gives the yeast good bit of time to develop a bunch of nice flavor and aroma, in addition to obviously the ethanol we're looking for. So we'll wind up with that wash at call it 10% alcohol by volume. We do stripping runs where we'll take it to call it about 90 proof, not really making any cuts to speak of. We combine the low wines from those separate fermentations together for our rectification, where we'll take it to about 180 proof, which depending who you ask, is either a high or low proof coming off the still. For us, it's a nice balancing act of keeping in all the character from the cane syrup, from the molasses, and everything that we went to the trouble of doing with those two yeast strains, while also coming off light enough that you don't blink at it in something super light, refreshing like a daiquiri mojito. Flavored stuff and aged stuff is going to go through that same fermentation distillation process, but in the case of the gold here, it's going to go, let's see, about a year and a half in used bourbon barrels for about 99% of what's in here. And less than 1% will be aged for, long story, regulatory reasons, for far too long in Amburana barrels. So that's kind of like the salt and pepper of the blend there. Um, Fraction of a percent brings a lot of like cinnamon and vanilla and floral quality to that. So that's got a 1 year age statement. The PX dark rum, no age statement on this guy. It's going to go about a year and a half, 2 years in new American oak barrels, blend it back with unaged rum, put it into a used PX sherry cask for about 3 months, and then add a touch of molasses before bottling that. We do a coconut rum as well. So we just macerate dried organic coconut flakes on our unaged white rum for a few days, do a filtration that's kind of delicate balancing act, take out the coconut oil that makes it look like salad dressing when we've first gotten through the maceration, but leave enough in that it's got this great natural coconut flavor. And we add enough sugar to take that to the amount of sugar you tend to find in coconut water in a coconut. And we have an allspice dram as well. I don't have a prop bottle on me, but this time of year we sell a lot of it, heavily spiced and sweetened with molasses.
Great. Good stuff. And I want to ask the same question to Bob.
Okay. Well, of course, we use cane sugar. So that's comes to us in a dry crystal format. So we have to hydrate it with water and, bring it up to, pretty high sucrose content slurry. Then we inoculate with yeast, which we get exclusively from Lallemand, which is a French company that produces a wide variety of yeast for a whole host of reasons. And the particular strain that we prefer to use is ED214, which gives us a very slow, mellow fermentation cycle, anywhere between 5 to 7 days, relatively low heat generated through that, which we think the more gentle that, the better. And we get good yields. That particular yeast strain is high temperature, high alcohol tolerant. So we think we get probably the best yields in terms of alcohol per volume, from the fermentation with that particular variety. But everyone has their own choices and reasons for doing so. But that's for us. And then, most of our core rum groups are unaged. We do have a line of aged rums, which we're continuing to expand. We currently produce what I would call our pedestrian age rum, which is the standard, is minimum 5 years in once used bourbon barrels that we get exclusively from Heaven Hill in Kentucky. And we were talking earlier about logistics and, us being so far away from, the rest of the continental U.S. anyway. It costs us more to transport the barrels from Kentucky to Hawaii than it does to purchase them to begin with. So, but that's just the part of doing business here. But, our aged rums are aged in, once used bourbon barrels. Early on, we were thinking that we really, at the time, 2009, when we began distilling and selling rum, we thought, well, how are we going to distinguish ourselves? The question at the time was, does the world need another rum? And of course, the answer to that, depending, is, well, no, probably not. But if we could come up with a brand, or develop a brand that was unique and had broad appeal, then we felt that there was opportunity. So we decided to go heavily into flavors. And anyone who's familiar with the Kōloa brand know that we do a lot of different flavors. We have our standard white and gold rums, which are unflavored. And then we immediately came out with a dark rum, which is infused with Tahitian vanilla. So you get a very bold vanilla note, and that adds to the color as well. And then from that, we developed a coconut rum using natural coconut flavor. And then from there, we, branched off and did, all the other flavors that we have. Most recently, we launched Cane Fire Hot Cinnamon Rum, sort of in the genre of Fireball, but we think, it's unique and different in its own, in terms of the complexities of flavor. But we use cinnamon that is grown and harvested coming from the Big Island of Hawaii, where the volcanoes are, if people are not familiar with the different islands here. And so we get it from a grower there, OK Farms. So we use Hawaiian grown cinnamon. And we source as many of our flavors, ingredients, here locally. And so by developing flavors and helping to support our fledgling agricultural industry here in Hawaii, we think that we have created a portfolio of products that are delicious, unique, but also, well received by mixologists, which means that there are many different applications, but also the average consumer who ventures into our tasting rooms and sips our products neat there. So yes, it's a rum, and there are a lot of rums out there, but we think that by virtue of our portfolio, we've created a rum for anyone on any occasion.
All right, let's leave the tropics and head to the mountains. Megan, tell us about your process.
Yeah, so being located in Crested Butte, I would say that high up, 9,000 feet, things boil and ferment and age differently than they do at sea level. Um, Being mainly a cane sugar based rum, we ferment basically to a high ABV. We ferment in open air tanks for 7 to 8 days. So the fermentation probably itself is probably done around day 5, and then we leave it in there for an extra 2 days to kind of get some more deeper flavor profiles naturally. We use a champagne style yeast from Lalaman. And then when we're finished fermenting that cane sugar and that Louisiana molasses after about 7 to 8 days, it's about 15% ABV. So we charge our stills pretty high. We use a custom copper pot still. We used to distill for the first 12 years on our operation on a small, like alembic style still, and we kind of brought that up. You can kind of see it in the picture on the slide. We, unlike a lot of people that do double distillations, we find that one long and slow single distillation works for what we need it for. So that's about 10 hours of it coming slowly out the still, from the heads all the way to the tails. And then we're still very hands-on in our methods. We don't have columns or a bunch of controls, so our team is kind of tasting it as it's coming off the still and making cuts that way. But the fun part about where we live is the mountains. So Montanya's specialty is our premium barrel-aged rums. Um, our Platino, which is our silver rum, unlike a lot of American rum distillers that are creating a lot of those great flavor profiles just from the distillate coming off the still, we barrel aged our white rum. Our white rum's barrel aged 1 to 2 years in a barrel that previously held our gold rum. So it's going to give it a little bit more complexity and kind of round it out than you're typically used to in a Platino rum. Our next big skew for us is our Oro, which is our gold rum. We source all of our bourbon barrels from Law's Whiskey House. They're located in Denver, Colorado. And not just saying it to be biased, but as far as distillers making Colorado bourbon, they're doing a good job. They have a 4 grain blend. And one of the unique things is that when we distill, we let kind of like all that distillate pile up in a stainless tank. And then when they harvest their bourbon barrels, we're filling them with the rum the same week. So the barrels definitely still have a lot of bourbon in them. They're fresh and wet. And a lot of those bourbon attributes contribute to Montanya's age profile. Um, we also like to have fun with a bunch of double maturation releases. So our Exclusiva is 3 to 4 years in a bourbon barrel, and then we finish it in Colorado wine barrels. We kind of, as far as Colorado wine, it's not California wine, but we kind of like to work with whoever's making the best red blends in the state of Colorado for that. Um, and we don't really do a lot of flavored rums. We did do, I like to call it an infused rum. We made a pineapple habanero last year and released it. So what we did for that was we dehydrated pineapples into basically chips in-house, let those steep in the rum for 4 weeks, and then dosed it with fresh peppers, habaneros at the end. And we didn't add any sugar. One of the big things about Montanya is we don't want to ever have to add sugar back to our rums. So that even that pineapple habanero has a natural sweetness from the pineapples, but we didn't flavor it in any ways. Kind of like Jordan was saying with flavored stuff, filtration can get hard. So we try to really pick a filter that didn't have stuff floating around in the bottle, and still left all those flavors that we know and love. Kind of as far as like aging in the mountains, it's really the temperature swings we get. So as the temperature changes, even during the day, and then especially in the winters, um, that change in pressure is going to cause the liquid to move in and out of the barrel at like a faster rate. So let's say we made the same distillate in Crested Butte, and we took a barrel to Hawaii, and we took a barrel to the East Coast, and we took a barrel kept in the mountains. They would all taste drastically different. Um, and so that's kind of really what makes Montanya unique is the flavor profiles we're able to get within a 1 to 2 year span that might take someone in the Caribbean, 4 or 6 years. Um, yeah, I think that's all I got.
Awesome. And I just want to remind everybody in the audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, just put them in the chat box and we will make sure we get to as many of those as possible. So we've talked base substrates, we've talked production processes. Now want to get into how you tell your story. What are the key components of the story that you tell distributors, consumers, retailers, to educate them on that process you just talked about? What's really the star of your story? So I'll start with Bob on this one.
Well, that's interesting. I think first and foremost, we always focus first and primarily on the rums that we make themselves. I mean, those are the stars, I guess. That's what we're all about, is making and selling rum. I mentioned earlier in the intro that, I think to a large part, the success we've had has been our ability to tap into our very robust visitor industry here in Hawaii. We, at the time that we began producing rum in September 2009, we opened what was then Hawaii's first and only distilled spirits tasting uh, facility in the state, tasting room. And for several years, we were the Lone Ranger with that. And so since then, we've become, well known, TripAdvisor and, all those, Yelp, when people search for things to do on the island of Kauai, Kōloa Rum usually pops up. So we entertain 300 to 400 unique visitors per day in our tasting room, and these folks are coming from all over the world. And so, we have the opportunity to interact and introduce them to the brand in a very comfortable, and non-assuming way, and have them try them and draw their own conclusions. The key points, I think, in terms of describing the attributes of our rum is that number one, we're not an industrial rum. We're not made from molasses, which is an industrial byproduct. And no offense to folks that use molasses. I mean, I've tasted some very, very good molasses-based rums, but again, when describing our products to folks who are not as intimately familiar with rum making, making that distinguishing point that we are a cane sugar-based rum, therefore we believe it's more smooth, cleaner, polished, more mixable, more sippable, etc. That's what we lead with. And then, as I also mentioned earlier, we're heavy into flavors, and we always make the point with whomever we're speaking to is that we use as many locally sourced Hawaii grown ingredients for the flavors that we use. For example, I mentioned the hot cinnamon cane fire rum made with cinnamon grown and harvested on the Big Island of Hawaii. We have a coffee rum that's made with locally grown Kauai coffee. It's located, the coffee plantation is located on the island of Kauai. They have over 3,000 acres with a variety of different beans. And they bring us freshly ground dark roast Arabica beans, and we do a cold brew in the distillery, blended with our white rum. Add a little bit of cane sugar just to balance out the acidity and the bitterness that typically fresh brewed coffee would have. And it makes a delicious rum product. I mentioned earlier the coconut rum made with from fresh young coconut. And then we have a spice rum, which is using a variety of spices and so forth. And then when you go to the aged rum, I mentioned that we once use bourbon barrels that we get exclusively from Heaven Hill. We have a variety of ages that we currently offer. Our standard aged rum is a minimum 5 years in the barrel. All of our aging is done here on the island of Kauai, which is interesting because we have a unique environment. And people think of Hawaii as being warm all the time. Well, relatively speaking, it is. But you would be surprised, for those of you who are not as perhaps familiar with Hawaii as we are, is that we can have temperature fluctuations of 40 to 50 degrees in a day. In our warehouse, we have a metal roof, and we rack up our rums, and it's not insulated, so temperatures can get pretty warm during the day, and then at night it drops down 40 degrees to 60 or something at night. So we get that temperature fluctuation that gives us the expansion and contraction of the alcohol in the barrel that gives the results that we need. So the main point is that we use as many locally sourced ingredients as we can, which helps to support our local agricultural industry, but it also creates a network of fans and supporters that we might not otherwise have. So it's a formula that is working for us.
All right, Megan, how do you tell Montanya's story?
Kind of our main tagline is America's Mountain Rum, and it's really our sense of place. I think, especially when people travel to the mountains and in Crested Butte and other ski towns, naturally they want to take a piece of that back home with them, back when they leave the mountains. And with our barrel aging, we don't temperature control our warehouse. Like there's no humidities added to it, so our barrels really kind of age with the mountains. And so when people are able to sip our rum, we're sipping them on a mountain experience. So, like operates with Montanya, like when you want to reward yourself after a good long day, like sip on Montanya for that. Um, One of the things, when we're talking to distributors and, our accounts and stuff is, um, sustainability has kind of always been really big to us, not just kind of where we source from and who our suppliers are, but how we kind of run our company internally and treat our employees. And so there's a lot of, accounts that do farm to table, and, when they want a rum and they kind of want that transparency behind the bottle to know exactly, where the cane is sourced from, being in Louisiana, where the barrels are aged, that it's all done in house. is kind of part of the craft story. Um, and in Colorado, our main selling point is we're the only craft distillery in Colorado that focuses, as far as I know, um, solely on rum. A lot of Colorado distilleries are doing whiskey or doing, one of each kind of SKU. And so rum's kind of been our dream since day one. Our founder, kind of why it started, was our founder was celiac. So whiskey and some other spirits didn't sit well with her. So rum is something that she enjoyed to drink. We built a mountain rum brand from there. Um, I think having the tasting room in a tourism place is very key to our business model. It allows a lot of people to experience our rum and take it home from them, and then now they're able to order online, thankfully. Um, and yeah,
All right, and Jordan.
Depends on our audience a little bit. If I am talking to buyer for a bar or liquor store, that kind of thing, that knows rum, they know the category, they know what they like. Maybe they're not that familiar with us. Um, I really like to lean into that we are, world class, high quality, not just not just local. Local is great, but local gets you often like in the door, but not a reorder. Depending um, on the quality, which is I'm sure many other distillers can relate to, has been a journey for us as a company. So I think we're in an incredible place right now. We've got, all these trying to shove more and more metal stickers onto our white rum bottle. We got the 2022 best of class of all the white rums at San Francisco World Spirits Competition, double gold every year since then, which means two consecutive platinums. Medals don't mean, you know, everything, obviously, but as a shorthand for like, oh, we make it around the corner, but I'm legit also. I think that helps a lot in getting people to listen through the pitch. I think we spend a lot of time in our consumer interactions, which we have a lot of at our tasting room and at our location in our ballpark in DC. This starting this season, we've been operating a bar inside Nationals Park as well, which has been great because we reach a lot of people who are there, not because they sought us out, but because they're at the baseball game and they're looking for a drink. Now all of a sudden we've got an opportunity to, pour them a drink, tell them to come by the distillery, do a tour, do the whole thing. Um, a lot of what we're doing is selling people on rum as a category in general. Um, and I think that is a really fun place to be. We're pitching ourselves, of course, but we're also saying like, rum can be so many different things. It can be this breadth of our products. It can be, um, you know, unaged or aged or flavored or a liqueur, or it can be the different spins on it that all of you guys have. And so I think we do spend a lot of time getting people who might come in the door seeing distillery and going like, cool, we'll take, three bourbons, please. And we're like, well, slow down, actually. That's not what we're doing here. But let me tell you about why you should be excited about our rums. Um, and I think we've made a lot of, converts along the way.
All right, so along similar lines, talking to consumers, uh, biggest misconceptions, if you could come up with like one statement that you hear over and over again from people that is some sort of preconceived notion they have about rum, tell us what that is and how do you counter that? So, Megan, this is for you first.
I'd say number one over the course of the years is like the cliche pirate themes, and that rum is just Captain Morgan. I think a lot of times when we're have people come into our tasting room, that's kind of all they can associate rum to, and I think that's just a lack of education on the category as a whole. And so that's where we, come in and say that rum is diverse and needs and should be held at the same standards as whiskey and agave. Kind of, if you look at the rum cat, like every basically spirit has a pricing tier, whether it's standard, value, premium, super premium. and you look at the premium rum category, which is what Montanya is classified as, it's 4% of the total category. And you look at whiskey, it might be 37%, or agave might be, I think, in the 30 range. So we're sitting on a very underdeveloped category when it comes to premium rum. But I mean, Montanya's been in it for a while, so has Bob and Jordan, and this is what we're here to champion, is that, rum is good, and there's American rum distilleries making really good products. And so I think the misconception is that it's not Captain or it's not Bacardi or these pirate themes, that it can be used in really great elevated cocktails that don't have to be sugary and sweet. And that's kind of where Montanya has specialized in our bar program, is by doing those classics, but with a rum spin.
All right. Jordan.
The sweetness, I would say, is the big one. A lot of people expect rum to be super sweet and sugary because it is made from sugarcane and because many rums out there are super sugary. And they, of course, don't have to be. That is in our control as producers, whether we add any sugar at all, and if so, how much, and what is that in balance with, hopefully. So uh, that's the biggest one. And for our products where we do add sugar, for example, in our coconut rum, we try and have a restrained approach. So I mentioned with that one, we sweeten that to 35 grams a liter of sugar, which is what you find in coconut water inside a coconut. So that's, there's a reason for that concentration. And, it honestly makes it taste more coconutty once we've added that, because, there's all the stuff that's in coconut, but if the sugar that is normally in coconut isn't there, then it doesn't land to your brain as much like real coconut. So we try and be thoughtful about that, not just, well, the 21-year-olds will love it if we put in more. So that's one that you really need to get people to taste it to believe you.
All right. Bob, biggest
Well, I think
preconceived notion.
what I hear most when I'm down at our tasting room and interacting with visitors who come in is that, well, back in the day when I was in college, I drank some rum and didn't really have a good experience. And so I think a lot of people have been introduced to rum as a category in less than ideal circumstances or conditions. And perhaps they did not get, a real premium, high quality product to begin with. So there's a certain amount of bias, I think, that's out there against rum. And, it's interesting, just to digress for a moment, when we first began producing in 2009, people were saying then, oh, rum is the next big thing. It's the category that's going to go super premium and it's going to have its breakout, and it's going to be great. We're still waiting for that, But I think a lot of people come in with a misconception or just lack of knowledge and experience with rum. And we always tell people, it's liquid to lips. You've got to, give people an opportunity to try our products. And, and when they do, hopefully, and I think we've demonstrated that, you win them over. People are very discerning nowadays about what it is that they are going to spend their hard-earned money on. They want to know a lot more about, why should I buy this again, versus something else. They want to know what's in it. A lot of times they want to know details about how it's made. So there's a selling proposition that goes on day to day, not only with individual consumers, but with other people in the trade, distributors and retailers, and bartenders and whatnot. I mean, they're inundated, with products, and so they can't buy it all. So you've got to have a selling proposition, and for us, it's about the ingredients, how it's made. But it really comes down to taste. And if we can get people to sample our products, we feel like we'll seal the deal. and more often than not, that's been the case. For us, tasting events at accounts, the retail accounts where it's permitted or encouraged, that we find to be a great tool because again, you're giving people an opportunity to try it, but they're not under any undue pressure, to buy. But we have really, really good results when we're able to do tastings, and we support those, and in accounts that will welcome that. We
All
also,
right.
just
Oh,
real
sorry.
quickly, I just want to say that we also promote the fact that we are a Hawaii rum, which is unique. People automatically assume rum needs to come from the Caribbean if it's going to have any, you know, you know, chance of being a superior product. And I think each of us on the panel today will certainly attest to the fact that we all make really good rums, and we're not from the Caribbean. So, that's it's education too, just making people aware of what those of us who are here are doing and what we're making, and hopefully, convince them that it's a good product to have.
All right. I want to talk cocktails next. Real quickly, I just want to hear from each of you. Uh, obviously everybody associates rum with tiki drinks, tropical drinks, but it's versatile in so many other things. So I want to hear each of your favorite non-tropical, non-tiki cocktail that rum mixes well in. And I want to start with the guy who's actually based in the tropics, Bob.
Well, we do a line of ready to drink cocktails, that's for sure. Um, in the beginning, it's interesting, sort of part of our evolution and development as a brand. When we decided to establish a rum company on Kauai, we had an operating sugar mill. In fact, at the time, we had several, and so we knew we had a source of the the basic input ingredients. But we also, wanted to create products that would have broad appeal. We purchased a operating jam and jelly factory, and we spent the first couple of years of our existence as we were building out the distillery and going through the permitting process. We made some pretty darn good jelly and jams using locally sourced fruits and whatnot. And during that time, before we got fully licensed to make alcohol, we decided, well, let's venture out and make a non-alcoholic Mai Tai cocktail. And so we did that. And it was a big success, like relatively speaking, a success. And so when we finally got our permits to distill and produce alcohol, it was just a matter of mixing the alcohol with this already pre-existing Mai Tai mix. And so right out of the gates, not only were we producing rum, but we had a ready-to-drink cocktail. And that was, back in 2009, we were sort of on the leading edge of that aspect, I guess, of the industry. And then we were approached not long after that by our flagship airlines here in Hawaii, Hawaiian Airlines, who were very interested in the Mai Tai cocktail and adding it to their in-flight service. And so, long story short, they picked it up and served that on board Hawaiian for a good many years. And then they later asked us if we would consider developing a rum punch for them as something new and different. And we did. We created a rum punch using passion fruit, orange, and guava, affectionately referred to as POG here in Hawaii. It's our favorite Hawaiian morning juice. Is passion fruit, orange, and guava together. So we produced that rum punch, and Hawaiian quickly introduced that on board. And so this meant we had two ready-to-drink cocktails, and then we've expanded from there. And the RTD part of our business is key. It's a gateway, it's an introduction into Kōloa Rum Company. We've got broad distribution. We're in Costco and so forth here in Hawaii, which is a great platform with, gives us great exposure. So, we're continuing to build and expand on the ready to drink cocktails, and so it's a big part of our business now.
All right, Jordan, I had a really great rum old fashioned at your distillery just last week. One or two other cocktails you recommend that aren't tropical in nature?
Yes. So we love going the non-tropical route because one, we're in Washington, D.C. And that's not our setting necessarily. And two, we want to have people think of rum as, the spirit of choice for whatever kind of cocktail they like to drink. It's so versatile, it takes so many different forms. So that rum old fashioned, for example, is very specifically on our menu because so many typically dudes come into our bar and are like, no, I'm whiskey and I only do whiskey. We do a split based old fashioned. There is bourbon in there along with our gold rum. There's much more of our gold rum in it, but it's kind of like a gateway olive branch to like, oh, well, there's whiskey in this one. And then they might move into the rest of our rum things. Um, what I've been liking lately is doing a Negroni with our coconut rum in place of the gin because the soft, oily coconutiness against the, you know, kind of sharp, bitter Campari is a really fun balance. The coconut brings it, I guess, technically into some tropical territory, but that Negroni format drink is is not. So that's a goodie.
Great. Megan.
I would say since most of our rums are aged rums, we pitch old fashions to both consumers and buyers. So we have a maple smoked old fashioned that's kind of like our classic. So it's our gold rum. We make all of our own bitters and distribute those too. So it's gold rum with cherry black pepper bitters, a dash of maple syrup, and we smoke that on cherry bark. Um, so we're really excited about that for the holiday season. People are going to be able to like pretty much like buy that cocktail gift box online, to be able to like bring that cocktail to dinner parties or wherever they want to drink it. Personally speaking, though, my favorite rum cocktail is a classic daiquiri. That's kind of what I order when I go to places that have rum on the menu. I feel like with the classic daiquiri, you can really taste the quality of a good white rum. And so, kind of when we made our white rum, that's what we were going for. We want it to really play well in a nice daiquiri. Some people still believe that daiquiris have to be frozen. So I'm talking just a classic handshaken with fresh lime, and Louisiana sugar.
Terrific. And now, just in closing, I just want to get sort of one sentence or two about the future of rum. Like, what excites you the most about the future of the category? And whoever wants to, let me ask this to Megan first. Just give a quick one sentence on what excites you the most about the future of the rum category.
Yeah, we at Montanya believe it's a underdeveloped category, and we're excited for the future of it because there's a lot of really great producers around us that are sharing their spirits now to a broader audience. And I think just the more people making great rum is going to help the category, as a whole.
Yes, I agree with Megan there, and as I mentioned earlier, I've been hearing for many years since I've been in this industry that rum was the next big breakout category. We're all still waiting on that, but on the other hand, I think individually between us all here on this panel, and certainly there's some others, we're all making superior products, and in our own way, we are the best ambassadors for rum, because we're introducing our products to people on a daily basis, and in many cases, winning new converts, I guess, to the rum category. I think there still is a certain amount of bias out in the general market against rum. A lot of the reasons aren't really correct, I guess, or accurate. But I think what we're doing ourselves individually here and collectively as a group of rum producers, it's just a matter of time before we turn this thing around and rum, we'll truly have that breakout. And I think we'll be well positioned at that time to lead that.
All right, Jordan.
Megan, was the stat that you shared that, we our category of within rum is about 4%
Yeah, it was
of the total volume?
IWSR, just kind of their category data.
Okay. It would be hard to sell less. So there's nowhere to go but up, it's gonna happen, everybody. So let's keep at it.
All right. That wraps things up. We do have one question from the audience that I just wanted to get to real quick, and I see that Megan's already answered it, so I wanted to get the other two panelists to answer it. What's your fermentation temperature, Bob? And Megan, you said 88 Fahrenheit.
Well, the Lallemand yeast that I mentioned earlier that we prefer um, is creates a very mild, relatively low temperature fermentation. Therefore, it takes longer, 5 to 7 days typically. And we find even in we don't consider Hawaii actually to be tropical per se. Our environment is more subtropical, but obviously warm, generally speaking, most of the time. We actually find that we don't need, to temperature control the fermentation cycle. And that's a factor of the yeast that is used, and the gentleness again of the fermentation. So heat in and of itself is really not a major concern or factor for us.
Jordan?
We are right around 90. Our head distiller, John, I think, is on here, so he could throw more specifically in the chat. But we've been 80s, low 90s with our two different strains and tweaked that a little bit over the years, but that's our neighborhood.
All right. Well, I just want to wrap things up. We are a little
There you
over
go.
time. I just wanted to, before we go, let everybody know registration is now open for the 2026 ACSA Craft Spirits competition. Head over to AmericanCraftSpirits.org to enter. The deadline is in just about a month, October 20th. And of course, I'd like to once again thank our amazing panelists today, Megan, Jordan, and Bob. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's edition of the Craft Spirits Roundtable. Enjoy the rest of your day.